Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Monica Cruz, and I serve as the State Data Center Lead for the Texas Demographic Center. For those of you joining us for the first time, the Texas Demographic Center is the State Data Center for Texas, and we are a member of the U.S. Census Bureau State Data Center Network. We function as a local point for the production, interpretation, and distribution of demographic information for Texas. We also produce and disseminate population estimates and projections, as well as other helpful demographic tools, especially tailored for Texas. Special emphasis is placed on data that may be useful to policymakers at the local, county, regional levels regarding the demand for state services and other resources. During breaks, you'll see a wonderful story map highlighting some interesting demographic facts about our state. Some of you saw some of that early on. And we will provide a link to the story map in the chat for you to access at your convenience. A few housekeeping items. Everyone will be muted during presentations, but feel free to enter comments in the chat and post questions in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We will review comments and questions when the speakers finish their presentation or break for questions. If you send messages or comments in the chat, be sure to select all panelists from the drop-down menu and be mindful not to enter sensitive information into the chat. We have a great lineup of speakers for you over the next 3 afternoons. Today we'll be hearing from Dr. Lloyd, our state demographer, who'll provide our State of the State talk on demographic trends in Texas. He'll be followed by Jessica Peña and Beverly Pratt from the U.S. Census Bureau, who will talk about race and ethnicity and the 2020 census. And we will close with a star cast made up of my colleagues from the Texas Demographic Center, who will highlight several of the great data products and tools that we all produce for data users throughout Texas. Before we begin with our first speaker, I'd like to take a moment to read a special message from the Director of the U.S. Census Bureau, Robert Santos, who happens to be a native Texan. So at this time, I'm going to share my screen. A little bit about Mr. Santos that I'd like to share. Santos' career spans more than 40 years in survey research, statistical design and analysis, and executive level management. He previously served for 15 years as Vice President and Chief Methodologist at the Urban Institute and directed its Statistical Methods Group. He was Executive Vice President and partner of New Stats, a social science research firm in Austin, Texas. Mr. Santos is the 26th director of the U.S. Census Bureau. He was sworn in on January 5th, 2022. He sent us a letter today, which we're very pleased to receive, addressed to Dr. Lloyd and our staff at the Texas Demographic Center. Congratulations on holding your 2022 Texas State Data Centers Affiliate and Data Users Meeting. This meeting is a great opportunity for your network and the Texas data users to hear directly from the Census Bureau subject matter experts about all upcoming data releases and tools. Also, I would like to thank the Texas Demographic Center for its efforts in making the 2020 census a great success. TDC's unique knowledge of census data continues to enrich the data community and the public at large. The website is remarkable, showcasing your hard work with several census-related presentations, as well as the creation of localized, easy-to-understand infographics, interactive data tools, and maps. I'm further impressed by the long-standing partnership between the State Data Center Program and the Census Bureau. The impacts of this partnership are experienced across the Census Bureau and in all 50 states, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and the 4 island areas throughout the decade. I'm grateful for this support. Thank you again for the substantial work and effort that the Texas Demographic Center expends in addressing the needs of the data users community and the public in Texas. We look forward to your continued support as we prepare for upcoming Census Bureau data releases. Sincerely, Robert Santos, Director. So we're very thankful to our friends at the Census Bureau for that great letter and for Mr. Santos's support throughout with our collaboration with the State Data Center Network. Now what we will do is I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Rafael Gonzalez, who will introduce our first speaker.
Lloyd Potter was appointed State Demographer on June 4th of 2010. Dr. Potter holds a PhD in Demography and Sociology from the University of Texas at Austin, a Master of Public Health degree from Emory University, a Master of Science in Education from the University of Houston at Clear Lake, and a Bachelor of Science from Texas A&M University. He is a professor in the Department of Demography at the University of Texas at San Antonio, where he also serves as the director of the Institute for Demographic and Socioeconomic Research, also known as ITSR. He has extensive experience working as an applied demographer in several settings, and his current research focuses on public policy and health-related demographic topics and training applied demographers. Dr. Potter, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rafael, and thank you, Dr. Cruz, for organizing the conference and getting us started. So I'm going to just jump right in here. I'm going to share my screen, I hope. Oh, looks like it's... And hopefully I can get the slideshow to go. There it is. So I'm going to really go through and talk about a range of different issues in Texas and are related to demographics. And I'll start off here by talking about the 2020 census. You can see the 2020 census, we had a little over 29 million Texans. We added almost 4 million Texans over the decade, and we were going fast. We grew at a rate of almost 16%. That's faster than any other state except for Utah and Idaho. And I should also note we grew more than any other state did over the last decade. When we look at the most recent population estimates we have from the Census Bureau for looking at population change between 2020 and 2021, you can see that Texas added over 310,000 people. And that's pretty significant, especially when you consider the United States only added 392,000. So that's roughly 39% of the total population change for the country. Of course, there are states that lost population, but it's not quite as Texas made up 79% of the population change in the country. When we look at the population distribution in the state, you can see we have what we refer to as the demographic triangle, or population triangle, with Dallas, Fort Worth, San Antonio, Austin, and Houston at the points. Really rapid filling in along the I-35 corridor. And the population triangle is really where most of that almost 4 million Texans were added over the decade. If we look at the I-35 corridor and east of it, that's 87% of our total population. And one thing to keep in mind is in 2010, that number was 83%. So we're seeing increasing population and population density in the population triangle and also the lower Rio Grande Valley. When we look at, excuse me, numeric change over the decade, you can see all the brown counties in the population triangle and tan counties were adding significant numbers of population, but of our 254 counties, 143 of them lost population. So all of those green counties were losing population. Much of that is from domestic out-migration, and I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a little bit. But it's also in many of the counties, which also talk about natural decrease, more deaths than births. I'm going to talk just briefly about the census and quality, because I think that's one of the things that the Census Bureau has now been releasing some of their quality metrics in terms of the quality of the data. There are two basic methods that the Census Bureau uses to assess quality. One is something called demographic analysis. That's essentially a population they build from birth and death certificates and immigration data. It's only done at the national level. And so essentially, when you look at there's a sense that there was a very slight overcount or a very slight undercount of the total population from the demographic analysis data at the national level. But when we look at it by age, you see that the gray part is the census, and the line is the demographic analysis, or the dotted line. There's age heaping in the census that you can see in certain years, and overcount of the college age population, undercount of children, and there's some overcount of the elder population as well. So if you look overall at the historic estimates of coverage using demographic analysis, you can see 2010 was very close. 2020, we did have more undercount than we did in 2010, but nothing compared to when you look at 1990 and also the overcount that occurred in 2000. When we look at issues of coverage by race and ethnicity, and again using demographic analysis, and compare 2010 and 2020, I think probably one of the more significant issues got the Asian population, where there was overcount, non-Hispanic white overcount that was statistically significant between that it was statistically significant. But then if you look at the some other race and the Latino population was undercounted by almost 5%, according to estimates from the demographic analysis. And then the other way that the Census Bureau looks at quality is something called the post-enumeration survey. So after the census is completed, they do a national survey that's used then to estimate the population and the characteristics of the population, and then they also match those data to census counts. So they match, if they re-interview or interview a household, they'll match that household to what the census count had for that housing unit, and be able to tell, how accurate the census was relative to the survey. These data were just released last week. You can see that Texas is one, and if you look at the counts, were under the states that had undercount, which are largely in the South, with the exception of Illinois. And Texas is certainly one of them. And if you look at the numbers in terms of total undercount, in terms of rate or percentage, you can see Arkansas, Mississippi, and Tennessee had the largest percentage undercount, then Florida, Illinois. And of the 6 that had statistically significant undercount, Texas had the smallest percentage. But nonetheless, again, Texas had statistically significant undercount. In the 2010 census, that undercount was 0.97, and it wasn't considered to be statistically significantly different from 0 in 2010. But there was some estimate of undercount then. Now I'm just going to quickly jump into looking at change at the local level over the decade. Here's showing population change at the county level. Harris County grew more than all but one county in the country. Bear, where San Antonio is, all but 5, or I should say 4. But I think one of the things that's interesting here, if we look at these counties, they're all those urban core counties in the population triangle, or those suburban ring counties around the population triangle. But if we look here, Dallas and Harris County had net out domestic migration over the decade. So 2 of our largest counties we're actually experiencing net out domestic migration, which over the last decade was being offset by international migration, and then of course natural increase to make them significantly growing counties. I'm going to talk in a little bit about what happened from 2000 to 2020 to 21, and you're going to see some interesting things here for Harris County and for Dallas County. And these are the fastest growing counties in the country. Hays and Comal are the two counties in between Austin and San Antonio. First and second fastest growing counties in the Williamson, just north of Austin. Fort Bend, all the other counties with the exception of Midland are suburban ring counties around either the Dallas-Fort Worth urban core, Houston, or San Antonio, Austin. And if you look here, rapid growth also tends to be driven by domestic migration, where you see the bulk of the population change over the decade was being driven in these fast-growing counties by domestic migration. Now, here's what I wanted to show you about the 20 to 21. Essentially, Harris County and Dallas County had population decline. So if you think about that, Harris County was the second most significant growing county in the country over the last decade. And in between 2020 and 2021, it lost population, as did Dallas. And most of that loss is because of net out migration, which is somewhat being offset by more births than deaths, but not quite. And then if we look at those counties that were growing the most over that 1 year, the last year, and so these are actually the first data we've seen that kind of have some information about what was happening with the pandemic, which is kind of why I'm highlighting them. But if you look at those counties that grew the most, most of them from Montgomery to the left, all of those are growing largely from domestic migration, significant domestic migration, and growing a lot. When we look at population change by race and ethnicity over the decade, you can see that only 4.7% of our population change last decade was from growth of the non-Hispanic white population. Over 95% was from growth of minority populations, with almost 50% of our population change being driven by the Latino population. This is resulting in close to parity in 2020 when you compare 2010 to 2020, close to parity in terms of the Latino population and the non-Hispanic white population. And indeed, when we project the population forward to about now, the Latino population is probably at parity or equal to the non-Hispanic white population in size right about now. And then we also see significant growth Asian population as a percentage, and then the non-Hispanic other, which is largely people that identify with more than one race. So they'll have two or more races identified on their census form or on the American Community Survey. When we look at the age structure by non-Hispanic white and Hispanic, you can see the non-Hispanic white population has the baby boom. So these are single years of age from 1 to 95 plus. And the red are non-Hispanic white, the blue is Latino. And you can see the baby boom age generation, as they age, there are not younger non-Hispanic whites to replace them. So as that happens, as the baby boom age generation starts dying, we're likely to see potential decline in the non-Hispanic white population, unless it's offset by net in migration, which is what we've actually been seeing in Texas, that the net in migration of non-Hispanic whites is somewhat offsetting the decline that we had been forecasting. If you look at the Latino population, we see there is no baby boom, and there are cohorts, boom age cohort to replace them, until you get to these last few years where you see the result of declining fertility post 2007, 2008 recession. And that's also occurring with the non-Hispanic white population as well. When we look at change in population density over the decade, you can see the urban cores with Dallas, Harris County, Houston, Fort Worth, Collin County, where Plano is, and then Hidalgo County in the lower Rio Grande Valley, significant increases in density, but really all along the population triangle, we're seeing increases there. When we look at components of change over the decade for the state, the blue columns are the amount of population change from domestic migration, the orange from international migration, and then the gray from natural increase or births minus deaths. And so you can see that natural increase up until 2016 was really a significant driver, and actually up until recently was a significant driver in terms of population change in the state. But if we look here in the last 4 or 5 years, from 2016 forward, we're seeing declines in natural increase, meaning there's increasing deaths relative to births, which is resulting in there being fewer net births. And then if we look at international migration from 2016, it also has been declining pretty dramatically. But domestic migration, even though the highest year last decade in domestic migration was 2015, it declined until 2017 and then kind of picked back up here until 2021. And so when we look at and compare 2010 to 2020 and then just the last year, we see a real shift in terms of the drivers of population change for this one year, where more than almost half of our population change last decade was from natural increase. Now it's a little more than a third. Domestic migration was about a third, and now is well over half of our population change in this one year. And international migration has declined as a percentage of total population change. And so we think this shift probably has something to do with the pandemic. Probably again declining fertility, and certainly the environment has not been conducive for international migration. That has slowed dramatically over with the pandemic, and then again, Texas continues to be a driver for domestic migration. So one of the things that we thought was interesting was when we looked at last decade and looked at trends for domestic migration, and then compared that to 2020 to 2021. And if you look at these dark blue counties, they're all counties that had net out domestic migration last decade, and from 20 to 21, they had net in migration. So it's essentially they experienced a reversal. And so we think again that this may have something to do with what's been happening with the pandemic, that some people are now moving back to or moving to more rural counties. Because if you look at all the dark counties, none of them are like, of course, all of the urban core counties have been gaining population by domestic migration last decade. But all of these counties were, like largely rural counties that were declining from domestic migration. And now all of a sudden, that seems to have turned around at least for a year. So I mentioned earlier declining fertility. This is showing you the total fertility rate for Texas, which is the second set of columns from the left, and Utah, which has the highest fertility in the country, United States, and then several other states. Total fertility rate is an indicator of the average number of children a woman of childbearing years. And if it's 2.1, that's thought to be replacement fertility. So if a population has a total fertility rate of 2.1, it's not growing from fertility, net fertility, and it's not declining. Essentially, mortality and fertility have balanced, and the population is stable. If it goes above 2.1, then the population will eventually grow. If it's below 2.1, eventually the population will decline. And you can see in 2011 is the first year that Texas, as far as I know historically, has total fertility rate has fallen below replacement fertility, whereas the United States has been below replacement fertility since before 2008, and even Utah has fallen below replacement fertility in 2018. When we look at declining fertility in Texas by race and ethnicity, you can see that the Asian, African American, and non-Hispanic white have had low fertility, but with the last recession, we saw declines as we saw declines in fertility across the country with the 2007-2008 recession. But look at what happened with the Latino population. Dramatic declines, and the Latino population has historically had pretty high fertility that's been driving a lot of our natural increase in the state. And now, again, this is showing fertility before the recession, before the pandemic, and we're likely to see, I think, additional declines in fertility when data are released in the coming year for years where we were experiencing the pandemic. So the net result of this is it's influencing our age structure. So you can see here the 2010 age pyramid and 2020, males are on the left and females are on the right. And if you look at the 0 to 1 in 2010, this is where they are in 2020. So if you look at the bottom of this pyramid, though, you see this significant indentation. And if you think about that in terms of the concept of a mouse moving through a snake, except this is the opposite because there's this is behind the mouse, I guess, an indentation that will move up into primary and secondary school, post-secondary, and ultimately the labor force. And so that's with us now historically, and will stay with us as these cohorts age. And the only thing that will offset this indentation in Texas will be net in-migration of people of those ages. So we'll see what happens, but it has significant implications for our school systems and for our labor force going forward. And it's certainly something to monitor and assess kind of the impact that it's going to have and prepare for that. When we look at components of change geographically, this is showing you rates of, or say, population change from natural increase or decrease. What's interesting is all of the green and the yellow counties all had natural decrease. 86 of our 254 counties had more deaths than births. And again, this is the state that added more population than any other state over the decade. We have all these counties that are largely rural counties, young people aging up through the school systems, moving to the more urbanized areas. When they're in the more urbanized areas, they enter into the reproductive years, and they have their kids in those more urbanized areas and not back in the rural areas. And then the mothers and fathers and grandparents are the ones that are left back at the place of origin, and they're aging into the high mortality years. Here's showing you international migration. Again, if you look at the population triangle in Lower Rio Grande Valley is where most of that is occurring. Also El Paso and some of the urbanized areas out west. Domestic migration, again, you can see Harris and Dallas County having net out domestic migration, but all the counties around them are adding significant population from domestic migration all along the I-35 corridor. We go out to the Permian Basin, Lubbock and Amarillo, again, adding a lot of population from domestic migration. Where are they all coming from? California. So the net biggest sender in terms of states has been California over the last decade, followed by Illinois, New York, and Florida. Puerto Rico has been kind of emptying out of young people. Louisiana has consistently been a big sender of migrants to Texas over the decades. We did lose population migrant-wise to Colorado, Oklahoma, Washington, and Oregon. We think a lot of that has to do with skilled labor, fracking, people that are engaged in oil extraction, moving to some of those states. But essentially, you see much of this domestic migration is being driven by economics. If you look especially at California, Illinois, New York, the cost of living there is higher. Their economies aren't growing the same way that Texas's economy has been growing. And so the economics are such that essentially there's a net flow of people from those states to Texas to work here largely. And so when we look at migrants versus residents, residents here are people, these data come from the American Community Survey. Residents are people who on the American Community Survey said that they were living in Texas last year. And that doesn't mean they were living here 3 years ago, but last year they were living here. But a lot of them are people that were even born here or have been living here most of their life. Net migrants are people who in this survey said last year they were not living in Texas. But if we look at their characteristics, if we were to add the light blue columns, that would add to 100. If you add the dark blue columns, that would add to 100. So it's showing you the distribution of the educational attainment of each one of these groups. And you can see that the migrants tend to be less likely to have low levels of educational attainment compared to Texas residents, and more likely to have higher levels of educational attainment. Essentially, we're importing skilled labor, people with higher levels of education than Texas residents or those people that are moving here. When we look at this by occupation, same thing here, except, sorry, I'm not seeing the label here, but the blue is our residents and the orange are migrants. And you can see the jobs on the left tend to be higher skilled, higher paid jobs, and those on the right, lower skilled, lower paid. And again, you see that generally speaking, migrants are coming here and taking jobs that are higher skilled, higher paid, which makes sense given they tend to have higher levels of educational attainment and less likely to be in those lower skilled, lower paid jobs. One thing that we're seeing in Texas is a shift in the occupational structure toward higher skilled, higher paid jobs. So there is demand for skilled workers, and that's part of what's drawing a lot of people to move to Texas. But if we look at the jobs on the left here, those are higher skilled, higher paid jobs. Those on the right are lower skilled, lower paid jobs. And we're comparing the occupational structure in 2007 to 2017. So if the blue column is higher than the green column, that means there's been a shift over the decade into that occupation. And so you can see those higher skilled occupations tend to have a higher proportion in recent times compared to 2007, and the lower skilled, a smaller proportion. So our labor force is demanding higher skilled labor. So one of our challenges with this is that when we look at the educational attainment by race and ethnicity, you can see in particular the non-Hispanic white population, more than 70% of the adult population have some post-secondary exposure or more, whereas only a little less than 40% of Hispanics do. Keep in mind, as I was talking about earlier, that 50% of our population change this last decade was being driven by growth of the Hispanic population. And so, and keep in mind the demand for skilled labor and the fact that we're essentially importing skilled labor. And so one of our big challenges in the state is to kind of get this number to change and change pretty quickly. When we look at change for bachelor's degrees or higher, you can see that there have been positive changes for all race ethnic groups. The Latino population still is substantially lower than all of the other race groups, but we see pretty dramatic increase. In fact, increased by over 50% over this 12 years that we're looking at here. So that's pretty rapid improvement in educational attainment among the Latino and the African American population. But that's something that we have to continue to put pressure and try to find innovative ways to and pipelines for young minority students to find their way into post-secondary. And it doesn't have to be a four-year degree, associate degree, certificate, something that makes young people employable and employable for these higher skilled, higher paid jobs that I was just talking about. When we look at college enrollment over the decade by race and ethnicity, you can also see significant progress there. And this is kind of what I was showing you with that previous graph. You know, the enrollment among Hispanics in college has increased pretty dramatically. So we're hoping to see this number for the young Latinos continue to edge up. We also see some increase in terms of African American, Asian as well, but some decline overall over most of the decade for the number of non-Hispanic whites enrolled. So higher education essentially is really something that is becoming much more diversified in Texas as a result of some of the changing dynamics of race and ethnicity in the state. When we look at the distribution by persons with bachelor's degree or higher geographically, you see the population triangle. But if you look there closely, you can see it's really the suburban rings are where the higher skilled, higher paid jobs are and where those people with bachelor's degrees tend to be. And then if you look way out at Brewster County, there are probably 3 people with the bachelor's degree. That Brewster County is way out here in the by Big Bend. It's just there's really small numbers there, so it kind of stands out. When we look at our projections of the population over the decade, this orange line is the most recent projection we have. We're now using the 2020 census as our new population estimates and projections base, and we'll be producing and releasing a new set of projections later this year. But if you look at this orange line, this one lines up pretty closely with the census count. And we were actually just noting, you know, our projection was a little bit higher than the census count was. And then when the population, the enumeration survey, post-enumeration survey data were released, where Texas was 1.9% undercounted, when you take that number was actually very close to what the population of Texas probably was on census day. But look at the fact that we're still forecasting 47 million Texans by 2050. That's not something to take lightly, because with every person, we need more infrastructure, we need more water, we need more power, we need more roads. You know, so it certainly is something that is a challenge for us going forward. When we project the population forward by race and ethnicity, you can see the non-Hispanic white population is pretty stable, slight increases in it over the next 30 years. Latino population, significant increases, really the driver of population growth as projected to be, as is the African American population, also almost, not quite doubling over the next 30 years. And then the Asian population also increasing very dramatically, almost at parity with the African American population by 2050. When we look at the projected distribution of the population, you can see the population triangle. Lower Rio Grande Valley is where that's likely to happen. But if you also look at this, you know, some of the suburban ring counties, especially Denton and Collin County, Fort Bend County, and then Williamson County, very significant projected growth there. And then pace of growth, how fast we expect to see Texas counties grow. Here is really highlights where the rapid growth is occurring because of domestic migration in these suburban ring counties. Permian Basin, again, smaller numbers, but fast growth is projected. And last thing I'll mention, which you'll probably get no shortage of over our conference, is our website. We are working to kind of always add additional and new things to there. Here's just showing a swipe map for the 2020 census. And with this very interesting thing, and I think you'll hear a little bit more about some of our other products. I'm not going to talk about them anymore. And I'm going to stop there and stop sharing if I can figure out how to do that.
Thank you, Dr. Potter, for that great presentation. I'm going to go ahead and ask my colleagues to check if anybody has questions and answers or anything they'd want to post in the chat. Please do so. Now's the time to kind of ask a few questions to Dr. Potter. It's your opportunity.
Hi, Monica. This is Rafael. I'm just monitoring the Q&A section here. I'm not seeing actually a question just came through. Katie Dahlberg is asking, is the post-enumeration undercount included in the Census Bureau's 2021 population estimates by county?
I don't think they're using the post-enumeration survey for that, but the Census Bureau can produce what's referred to as an adjusted base. So they did make adjustments to the population at the state and county level as the base of their population estimate. So they weren't using the post-enumeration survey, but they did have other sources of information that allowed them to make adjustments to the what's referred to as the population base, essentially by age, sex, and race ethnicity. They did make adjustments to that, which in some ways I think probably accounts for the undercount, but probably not completely.
Thank you for that question, Katie, and thank you, Dr. Potter, for your answer.
Okay.
Right, I do see another question from Ben Abeto and another one from Karen Montgomery Gagny. I'm going to go with Ben's first. Our county level, hold on here, show me a little quickly here. All right. Are county level projections informed by the ground data, for example, site permits, county thoroughfare plans, updated land use patterns, housing prices, new larger employer investments or announcements?
I'll say no and yes. So the no is that our population projections really, the foundation of them are historic data. So we look at trends in terms of fertility and mortality, and we also look at trends in migration that have occurred historically, and then carry those trends forward. And we do make certain assumptions, and this is the yes part. So if we notice or know what's happening in a particular county, and we anticipate that for example, let's say a county looks like it's been experiencing really elevated migration, and its historic migration doesn't really look like its current migration. We'll make adjustments to the migration based on that. So we have pretty good understanding of the dynamics that are happening in counties and cities around the state. We're both in touch with local people, and then I and our staff also kind of travel around the state and have the opportunity to talk and actually see what's happening on the ground locally. So we do, I think, have a pretty good sense of change that's been occurring and some of the dynamics behind that. And we do make then adjustments to rates based on different kinds of information, but not at the level that you were talking about in terms of, actually going and looking at business patterns and those kinds of things for our county level projections.
Thank you, Ben, for that question. Karen asks, any trends or comments on Northwest Texas demographics?
Yeah, north. Yeah, I'm assuming that sounds like maybe the Panhandle, or I guess it could be um, well, so I mean, the rural parts are losing population, except like talked a little bit about earlier, where we saw turnaround in terms of domestic migration. But we're seeing the urbanized areas growing and growing fairly significantly. Like if you look at Amarillo, in Randall County, Potter County north of there is not growing all that fast. Um, and actually, I think has experienced some population decline. But if you go down to Lubbock, you see significant increase. And a lot of what's happening in much of West Texas and Northwest Texas is again, young people, but we're also seeing retirees that are moving into the urbanized areas. So it's not. Earlier, I was referring to young people moving. That certainly has been a driver, but um, if we look at at the fact that we have an aging population in much of rural Texas, many of those individuals don't want to drive an hour to go to the grocery store or go see the doctor. And then their kids are probably also living in an urbanized area, so they may have interest in being physically closer to their children and possibly their grandchildren and to the amenities that are present in a more urbanized area. And I think that's kind of one of the downsides of this trend is then much of rural Texas doesn't have the ability to sustain retail and also doesn't have the ability to sustain healthcare. And so we're seeing, a lot of physicians either retiring or closing up because they can't generate enough big enough patient base to justify staying open. And the same thing with clinics and so on, that it's just becomes financially difficult. So I think that's overall, I'd say kind of what we see happening kind of in northwestern Texas.
All right, I have two more questions. This one is from Andrew Hoaxema. We saw large differences in city populations in the 2020 census relative to their evaluation estimates and the January 1st, 2020 state data center estimates, though pretty close county level estimates. So for instance, the Georgetown 2020 census was about 20% lower than the 2020 evaluation estimate. What do you make of that?
Well, I think one thing I think we tend to know is that if we come up with an estimate or do a census count, it's probably wrong. The question is which one is more wrong. Um, so I think, we don't have detailed information on undercount or overcount below the state level, and don't have anything in terms of differences or kind of undercount or overcount by age, sex, race, ethnicity. So it's a little bit difficult to kind of tease out which one of those is likely problematic. My guess would be to kind of probably go with the census count, um, and do that with I don't want to say skepticism, but kind of like some degree of thinking that you might adjust it toward wherever the estimates were. Um, and again, that's probably based on, not probably, that's based on the fact that the census actually goes and has a list of all the housing units. And so um, if, if somebody is living in a housing unit, somebody's going to get counted there, whether or not they filled out a census form or whether or not an enumerar actually talked to somebody there. Um, they'll um, they'll either add them from what's referred to as administrative records, or they'll impute them if they don't have good administrative records for that housing unit. So they do go and visit every housing unit that hasn't responded, self-responded. And if there's evidence somebody's living there, then somebody will be counted there. So So again, I think probably the best indicator of the true population is going to be the census, as opposed to the more indirect methods that we use for estimating the population, both the evaluation estimates as well as kind of the estimates that we produce and the Census Bureau produces outside of the census year. We're basically using secondary data, births, deaths, and estimates of migration. Um, and that's, different than actually going and counting housing units and either counting the people or estimating the number of people that live in each housing unit.
Thank you, Andrew, for your question. And I think we may have time for one more question. It'll be a quick one. I'm seeing here Candace Jennings is asking, what do you think is contributing to the population growth in the counties just outside of the big cities? Are people moving from urban areas to there, or are people from other states moving to those counties?
Well, that's a yes and yes answer. If you look at Dallas and Houston, a lot of the domestic out migration is moving to suburban ring county. So in Houston, there are people that are moving to Fort Bend County and Montgomery County and Waller County. In Dallas, people are moving to um, Rockwall, Denton, and Collin counties, and now we're starting to see growth in the southern parts as well. But when we look at a lot of the domestic migrants that are coming into the state, um, they're and actually from other places in the state, they're tending to land in these suburban ring places, and a lot of that has to do with, one, there are now increasing number of jobs there. If you look at the number of both headquarters and corporations that are either have offices or headquarters that are now in what we would refer to as suburban ring counties, that number has increased pretty dramatically. And so they're hiring people, and they hire people from the urban cores of Texas, but also from around the state and other states. And then the other factor is, very often when people are deciding where to live, if they have children, they're looking at school districts. I mean, that's a big factor, kind of looking at quality of life factors. They want a house with a yard. And if you move closer into the city, that becomes harder and more expensive. So I think those are the major drivers of what's happening in the suburban ring, that there are Texans moving there, but then there are also domestic migrants moving into those as well. Okay, well, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'll turn it back over.
Thank you, Dr. Potter, for that great presentation, and thank you, Rafael, for moderating this session. As much as we strive to practice in this virtual world, something always there's always a glitch. So my apologies for interrupting and not having my sound system correct. But anyways, thank you everyone for joining us. Now, also just want to post, if we didn't get to your question during Dr. Potter's presentation, please go ahead and post it anyways. We take record of that and are happy to get back to you to answer any of your questions via email at a later time. So our next speakers will be from the Census Bureau, and we're going to stick to the schedule because I know people are hopping on and off. So our next speakers will be coming on board at 2:15. They will be discussing race and ethnicity in the U.S. 2020 Census and the Census Bureau's 2020 Census. So we are going to pause here for a quick break and resume right at 2:15 with our next presentation. We'll be back. Thank you.
Okay, F11.
All right, welcome back, everyone. We're going to continue here with our next set of speakers. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Janine Geffert, who will introduce our next speakers.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Janine Geffert, and I'm a research scientist associate here at the Texas Demographic Center. And I'm honored to introduce our next two speakers, Ms. Jessica Peña and Ms. Beverly Pratt, who will present about race and ethnicity and the 2020 census. Ms. Jessica Peña is a senior analyst in the Ethnicity and Ancestry branch in the Census Bureau's Population Division. She analyzes ethnicity data from the decennial census, American Community Survey, and the current population survey. She serves as a subject matter expert on the Hispanic population in the United States. Ms. Bev Pratt is a senior analyst in the Office of Race and Ethnicity Research and Outreach in the Census Bureau's Population Division. Bev is a sociologically trained race and ethnicity scholar, and her current analyses focus on 2020 census results and related measurement initiatives, for example, racial and ethnic diversity, equity, and intersectionality. Welcome, Jessica and Bev. You may start with your presentation.
Thank you. Let me share my screen.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. As Janine, I believe, just said, my name's Jessica Peña, and this is my colleague. I don't know if you want to.
Hi, everyone. I'm Bev Pratt, and I'm pulling up the slides now. It's nice to be here with everybody.
Yeah, thank you all for inviting us to talk about the 2020 census results and the results specifically on race and ethnicity, especially racial and ethnic composition and racial and ethnic diversity for the overall US, but concentrating mostly on Texas.
All right, here we go. One moment, we're having a little bit of technical difficulties. All right, thank you, everybody. So as Jessica said, we're here to talk with folks about the 2020 census results from Texas. Just as letting everybody know, I'm from Texas, so it's exciting to be here with everybody. I'm excited to talk about my home state. All right, as our country has grown, we have continued to evolve how we measure the race and ethnicity of the people who live here. The 2020 census redistricting data provides a new snapshot of the racial and ethnic composition of the country. It provides a new snapshot of the racial and ethnic composition of the country as a result of the improvements in the design of the race and ethnicity questions and improvements to our data processing and coding of what people tell us how they identify.
Are you sharing your screen? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
We cannot see your screen.
You cannot see my screen.
Let's see. No.
Okay.
Now
All
it's
right.
coming up.
See my screen?
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. All right. In August of 2021, we released 2 America Count stories to help the public examine the redistricting statistics for the nation in areas across the country. They are shown here, and they're both available on census.gov. The improvements we made for the 2020 census yield a more accurate portrait of how people self-identify in response to the 2 separate questions on Hispanic origin and race. It reveals that the US population is much more multiracial and more diverse than what we measured in the past. And this is also true for the state of Texas. It's important to provide context for today's discussion by highlighting the history of race and ethnicity on the US decennial census before we dive directly into the 2020 census results. Since the first US Census in 1790 and over each subsequent decade, the decennial census has collected race and ethnicity information, including in our current decade. Historically, the changes have been influenced by social, political, and economic factors, like this example seen on this slide from 1940. The US decennial census provides a valuable case study of the interaction between our nation's history and the concepts of race and ethnicity. Throughout much of its history, the race of respondents was determined by the observation of the census enumerator, and the ways in which people were classified were based upon prevailing notions of the time. Beginning with the 1980 census, and over the past several decades, the Census Bureau has collected race and ethnicity data according to federal standards from the U.S. Office of Management and Budget, or OMB. These standards were first directed in 1977 and were later revised in 1997. It's critical to note and important to note that race and ethnicity data are now based on the self-identification of respondents. We developed this interactive visualization to illustrate historical changes to the concepts, categories, and classifications of race and ethnicity in the decennial census. It shows how the categories used in the decennial census have changed over the past 230 years since the first census in 1790. We encourage you to explore this interactive data visualization on census.gov to learn more. Again, the decennial census, like all federal information collections, must follow standards established from the U.S. Office of Management and Budget when collecting race and ethnicity data. OMB, their minimum categories for data on race and ethnicity for federal statistics, program administrative reporting, and civil rights compliance reporting are defined as follows. OMB requires 2 minimum categories for data on ethnicity, Hispanic or Latino and not Hispanic or Latino. And OMB requires 5 minimum categories for race, American Indian or Alaska Native, Asian, Black or African American, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, and white. And people may report multiple races. Additionally, the Census Bureau is also required by Congress to use the category some other race on the decennial census and the American Community Survey. You can see the 2020 census questions on this slide. The Census Bureau did not use a combined question format for collecting race and ethnicity data because the OMB standards require the use of 2 separate questions on ethnicity and race for self-response. While a separate MENA category or Middle Eastern or North African category was not included, detailed MENA responses were elicited, collected, and coded. Per the 1997 OMB standards, Middle Eastern or North African responses are classified as part of the white racial category. While the Census Bureau tested an alternative question in 2015, we must ultimately follow the 1997 OMB standards and use 2 separate questions to collect data on race and ethnicity. Let's talk about the reporting of multiple race responses and how they are collected and tabulated. In response to the question on race, which instructs respondents to mark X 1 or more boxes and print origins, some respondents will report multiple race groups, such as white and Black, to indicate their heritage. These represent the reporting of 2 or more responses across major race categories. This also applies to the reporting of detailed responses across major race categories, such as reporting both German, which is classified as white following the OMB standards, and African American, which is classified as Black following the OMB standards. The goal of the instruction to mark 1 or more boxes and print origins is to help respondents understand that they are able to report multiple identities to represent their heritage. In a related but different way, some respondents will report multiple detailed groups to represent their multiple identities. For example, someone may report as both Native Hawaiian and Samoan. These multiple detailed Pacific Islander responses are collected, and they will be used to tabulate the total counts of detailed Pacific Islander groups. But they reflect a singular racial identity because both groups are classified as part of the Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander racial category. In a similar fashion, whether marked as a checkbox or written in, multiple responses within a category such as Marshallese or Fijian constitute multiple origins, but a single race. Let's continue. The 2010 census used a complex series of coding rules to determine how to prioritize and assign up to 2 codes for each unique text string. In the 2010 census, if more than 2 groups were part of a write-in text string on the same line in the race question, we prioritized coding race groups over Hispanic origin groups or other types of responses because we were limited to coding only 2 responses. In the 2020 census, our subject matter experts coded what they saw, coding up to 6 responses from left to right, regardless of race group or Hispanic origin, enabling all responses to be treated equally. Let's look at the last example of Spanish, Mexican, Samoan, and Chamorro. In the 2010 census, a response of Spanish, Mexican, Samoan, and Chamorro was only coded as Samoan and Chamorro, and the responses of Spanish and Mexican were not coded because of the prioritization of race responses over Hispanic responses when there were more than 2 responses in a write-in line. In the 2020 census, however, all 4 of these responses were coded. On this slide, we can see how this improvement to the coding rules impacts our final data by recognizing the rich and complex detailed identities reported by respondents. Let's look at the example write-in response of Cuban, Thai, and Filipino. In the 2010 census, even though Cuban was written first, as shown in the dark green text, the responses of Thai and Filipino were prioritized over Cuban because they are detailed race groups. Cuban was not coded or included in race tabulations because coding the 2 race groups were prioritized over it. The redistricting data tabulates major race groups. So in the 2010 census, this response was tabulated as part of the Asian race category, representing Thai and Filipino. In the 2020 census, however, all 3 groups in the write-in line response were coded, and the tabulation would be Asian, representing Thai and Filipino, and some other race, representing Cuban. I'll pass it back to Jessica right now.
Okay, so as Bev discussed, we improved the way we process the data and code the responses to race and ethnicity questions. The improvements and changes enable a more thorough and accurate depiction of how people self-identify, yielding a more accurate portrait of how people report their Hispanic origin and race within the context of a 2-question format. These changes reveal that the US population is much more multiracial and more racially and ethnically diverse than we measured in the past. We're confident that differences in the overall racial distributions are largely due to the improvements in the design of the 2 separate questions for race data collection and processing, as well as some demographic changes over the past 10 years. We are also confident, as shown in our research over the past decade, that using a single combined question for race and ethnicity in the decennial census would ultimately yield an even more accurate portrait of how the US population self-identifies, especially for people who self-identify as multiracial or multi-ethnic. Now let's dive into the results. So the 2020 census illuminates the racial and ethnic composition of the United States. The first component of this composition is shown on the current slide for ethnicity statistics, which comes from the question on Hispanic or Latino origin. From these data, we know that the Hispanic or Latino population numbered 62.1 million in 2020. In the next slide, we have the second component of this composition for racial statistics. These statistics come from a separate question on race. The To frame the discussion of racial composition, we use the concepts of race alone, race in combination, and race alone or in combination. These concepts have been in place since the 2000 census, and the three concepts are central to understanding our country's changing demographics. The 2020 census statistics provide us a new snapshot of the racial and ethnic composition of the country, and we'll take a look at the results within the next series of slides. The two or more races population, also known as the multiracial population, was measured at 33.8 million in 2020. The next series of slides shows that in the 2020 census, for all race groups, their in combination multiracial populations accounted for most of the overall changes in each racial category. So although the white alone population decreased by 8.6% since 2010, the white in combination population saw a 316% change during the same period. While the Black or African American alone population grew 5.6% since 2010, the Black or African American in combination population grew 88.7%. Over the past 10 years, the American Indian and Alaska Native in combination population increased by 160%. The Asian alone population grew by 35.5% between 2010 and 2020. And in comparison, the Asian in combination population grew 55.5% since 2010. The Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander alone population grew by 27.8% between 2010 and 2020. In comparison, the Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander in combination population grew faster at 30.8%. The sum of the race in combination population changed 733% since 2010. So it's important to note that these comparisons between the 2010 census and 2020 census race data should be made with caution, taking into account the improvements we have made to the Hispanic origin and race questions, to data processing, and to the way we code what people tell us. And accordingly, data from the 2020 census show different but reasonable and expected distributions from the 2010 census for the white alone population, the sum of the race alone or in combination population, and the multiracial population, especially for people who identify as both white and some other race. The largest multiracial combinations in 2020 were white and some other race at 19.3 million, white and American Indian and Alaska Native with 4 million, white and Black or African American at 3.1 million, white and Asian at 2.7 million, and Black or African American and some other race at with 1 million. So in table P1 of the redistricting data, population counts are available for every possible multiracial combination a respondent could have reported in the 2020 census question. On the screen, you can see an example of this table shown at the national level, and data are available for geographies down to the census block level. You can access data for your state, your county, your city or town, and even your neighborhood. Now that we've gone over nation level results, let's focus on Texas racial and ethnic composition. To do so, we snagged static images from an amazing interactive data visualization tool shown here that our team innovated to further illustrate 2020 census results on race and ethnicity. You can access the data visualization from census.gov, and we'll demonstrate the tool as we highlight results from Texas. All right, so first let's look at the white population in different groupings while showing you some of the capabilities of our data visualization. So here, the image on the left shows the percent white alone by county in Texas from the 2020 census, a total of 50.1% of the total population. So in the darker blue, we see counties with larger percentages of the white alone population, such as King County at 91.3% and Borden County at 91.3% of the total population. In the light blue, we see counties with smaller percentages of the white alone population, such as Maverick County and Starr County. The image on the right shows the percent change of the white alone population by county between 2010 and 2020. The white alone population decreased by 17.5% between 2010 and 2020. The darker the shade of green in counties, the larger the decrease in the white alone population. For example, we see Maverick County with a 66% decrease and Presidio County with a decrease of 65.3%. Now on this slide, the image on the left shows the percent white in combination by county in Texas from the 2020 census, which is 16.9% of the total population. So again, in the darker blue, we see counties with a larger percentage of the white in combination population. For example, Starr County at 46.8% of the total pop. In the light blue, we see counties with the white in combination population less than 5% out of the total population, such as King County at 1.9%. Now the image on the right shows the percent change of this same population by county between 2010 and 2020. The white in combination population increased by 755.6% between 2010 and 2020, again out of the total population. The darker the shade of purple in counties, the larger the increase of the population between 2010 and 2020. For example, we see Starr County with a 10,965.9% increase out of the total population. And on this slide, the image on the left shows the percent white alone, not Hispanic population by county in Texas from the 2020 census, a total of 65.4%. In the darker blue, we see counties with larger percentages of the white alone, not Hispanic population, such as Kent County at 97.8% and Claskett County at 97.4%. And in the light blue, we see counties with smaller percentages of the white alone, not Hispanic population, such as Fort Bend County at 39% and Dallas County at 46.6%. The image on the right shows the percentage of the percent change of the white alone, not Hispanic population by county. The white alone, not Hispanic population decreased by 1.6% between 2010 and 2020. In the purple, we see counties where there were greater than 20% increase in the white alone, not Hispanic population. For instance, the white alone, not Hispanic population increased by 74.2% in Hudspeth County and 64.1% in LaSalle County between 2010 and 2020. Now in the green color, we see counties where there was a decrease in the white alone, not Hispanic population. We see Starr County with a decrease of 52.2% of the white alone, not Hispanic population between 2010 and 2020. Again, these percentages are out of the not Hispanic or Latino population. So now let's continue and focus on the Black or African American population. So the image on the left shows the percent Black alone or in combination, not Hispanic or Latino by county in Texas, a total of 21.1% of the not Hispanic or Latino population in 2020. In the darker blue, we see counties with larger percentages of the Black alone or in combination, not Hispanic population, such as Jefferson County at 43.9% and Dallas County at 38%. The image on the right shows the percent change of the Black alone or in combination, not Hispanic population between 2010 and 2020. The Black alone or in combination, not Hispanic population increased by 23.5% between 2010 and 2020. The darker the shade of purple, the greater the increase for the Black alone or in combination, not Hispanic population. And we see LaSalle County with an 833.3% increase and Erath County with a 201.6% increase in the Black alone or in combination, not Hispanic population. Continuing with this slide, the image on the left shows the percent American Indian or Alaska Native alone or in combination, not Hispanic or Latino population by county in Texas from the 2020 census, a total of 2.3%. Again, in the dark blue, we see Maverick County, where this population was 30.3%, and Kennedy County, where this population was 12.4%. And the image on the right shows the percent change of the American Indian and Alaska Native alone or in combination, not Hispanic population. Between 2010 and 2020, this population increased by 129.8%. The darker the shade of purple, the larger the percent increase in the corresponding counties of the American Indian and Alaska Native alone or in combination, not Hispanic population. For example, Sutton County shows 480% change of this population between 2010 and 2020. On this next slide, we see the Asian alone or in combination, not Hispanic or Latino by county in Texas for the 2020 census, a total of 10% of the not Hispanic population. Again, darker blue. In the darker blue, we see counties with 20% or more of this population, such as Fort Bend County at 30.7% and Collin County at 22.8%. So the darker the shade of blue, the larger the percentage of the Asian alone or in combination population out of the not Hispanic population. The image on the right shows the percent change of the Asian alone or in combination population out of the not Hispanic population by county. And between 2010 and 2020, this population increased by 66.7%. Again, the darker the shade of purple, the larger the percent increase in the corresponding counties of this population between 2010 and 2020. This next slide looks at Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander alone or in combination, not Hispanic population. Again, on the left, we see the percent of this population by county in Texas at a total of 0.3%. And we see one county, Kennedy County, in darker blue, where the percent NHPI alone or in combo, not Hispanic population, was over 5%. All other counties show the NHPI alone or in combination, not Hispanic population, to be less than 5%. And the image on the right shows the percent change of the NHPI alone or in combination, not Hispanic population by county between 2010 and 2020. And this population increased by 74% between 2010 and 2020. And again, the darker the shade of purple, the larger the percent increase. Now let's look at the two or more races Hispanic population. So I'll refer to this population as the multiracial Hispanic population. The image on the left shows this population at 37.1% in Texas from the 2020 census. So as before, the darker the shade of blue, the larger the multiracial Hispanic population. So for example, we see Brooks County as having a multiracial Hispanic population of 52.3%. And the image on the right shows the percent change of the multiracial Hispanic population by county. So between 2010 and 2020, this population increased by 1,081.7%. Like before, the darker the shade of purple, the larger the percent increase in the corresponding counties of the multiracial Hispanic population. For example, along the border, we see both Starr County and Zapata County as having over 5,000% change in the multiracial Hispanic population between 2010 and 2020. So finally, let's look at the Hispanic or Latino population by county. So the image on the left shows the Hispanic population in Texas at 39.3% from the 2020 census. And just like before, the darker the shade of blue, the larger the Hispanic population. We see 61 out of 254 counties in Texas have a Hispanic population of 50% or more. Starr, Webb, Maverick, Zapata, Zavala, and Hidalgo counties all have Hispanic populations comprising over 90% of each county's total population. The image on the right shows the percent change of the Hispanic or Latino population by county between 2010 and 2020. Between 2010 and 2020, this population increased by 20.9%. The counties with the shades of purple show changes between 0% to 100% or more. For example, Liberty County and Kaufman counties, percent change of the Hispanic population were over 100% between 2010 and 2020. And the counties shaded in light green show changes less than 0%. For example, Concho County's percent change of the Hispanic population was negative 52.5% between 2010 and 2020. I'll now pass it over to Bev.
As we discussed in our America Counts story, which provides an overview of race and ethnicity in the United States, we are confident that differences in the overall racial distributions are largely due to improvements in the design of the 2 separate questions for race data collection and processing, as well as some demographic changes over the past 10 years. These results are not surprising as they align with our expert research and corresponding findings this past decade about the impacts of question format on race and ethnicity reporting. These improvements more accurately illustrate the richness and complexity of how people identify their race and ethnicity in response to separate questions within the current OMB standards. And again, we are also confident, as shown in our research over the past decade, that using a single combined race and ethnicity question in the decennial census would ultimately yield an even more accurate portrait of how the US population self-identifies, especially for people who self-identify as multiracial or multi-ethnic. There is so much important information available from the 2020 census, and our work has really helped us understand more about the country's racial and ethnic composition in a new light. In a companion America Counts story that we released in August of 2021, we conducted analyses to illustrate how the 2020 census results allow us to measure the nation's racial and ethnic diversity and how it varies at different geographic levels. I will talk about these results next and how we explored multiple measures of racial and ethnic diversity. For these measures of diversity, we cross-tabulate the Hispanic origin and race statistics as data users often do, such as with the 2020 Census Redistricting Table, Table P2. We see results that are not as impacted by the race reporting patterns of Hispanic or Latino respondents. Therefore, we are confident that the changes we are seeing from 2010 to 2020 in the diversity measures, which calculate mutually exclusive Hispanic origin by race groups, likely reflect actual demographic changes in the population over the past 10 years, as well as improvements to the question designs, data processing, and coding. Our measures of diversity enable us to see how all racial and ethnic groups are distributed across the country to inform our understanding of diversity. Our definition for diversity refers to the representation and relative size of different racial and ethnic groups within a population. Diversity is maximized when all groups are represented in an area and have equal shares of the population. We are using several approaches to measure the racial and ethnic diversity of the US population. These include the Diversity Index, prevalence rankings, and the diffusion score, and a series of prevalence maps. I'll walk you through each of these measures in the next few minutes, and we'll discuss the results, showing static images from our data visualization that focuses on racial and ethnic diversity. We encourage you to explore this interactive data visualization online if you haven't already, and these slides will give you an idea of what's available. To help set the stage for the next slide, we present here a state-level map using data from the 2010 census. The 2010 census map shows the geographic distribution of the diversity index across the country from state to state. The states shown in dark green were more diverse, with a diversity index score of 65 or more in 2010. States shown in light green were less diverse in 2010. So what is the diversity index? The diversity index measure tells us the probability that 2 people chosen at random will be from different race and ethnicity groups. The diversity index is bounded between 0 and 1. A value of 0 indicates that everyone in the population has the same racial and ethnic characteristics. A value close to 1 indicates that almost everyone in the population has different racial and ethnic characteristics. On this slide, we have a map calculating the diversity index for the 2020 census. At the national level in 2020, there was a 61.1% chance that 2 people chosen at random were from different race and ethnicity groups. This is higher than 2010, when the diversity index was 54.9%. In 2020, Hawaii had the highest diversity index at 76%, followed by California with 69.7% and Nevada with 68.8%. How does Texas compare? Texas has the diversity index of 67%, the 6th highest diversity index in the nation. You can see the diversity index for all states using our interactive data visualization on diversity, again available on census.gov. Here we've snagged a couple of images from the tool to show the diversity index results of Texas counties. We see diversity index levels for 2010 on the left and for 2020 in the center. In general, states with the highest diversity index scores tend to have additional groups beyond the 3 largest racial and ethnic groups. Here on the right of the screen, we see another snagged image from the tool showing the race and ethnicity breakdown in Texas. Specifically, we see that the 3 largest racial and ethnic groups for Texas in 2020 were white alone, not Hispanic, Black or African American not alone, not Hispanic, and Hispanic or Latino. Let's take a closer look. Another feature of our data visualization enables you to create a bar chart of all counties in Texas. Here, rankings on the left show the diversity index for a sample of Texas counties in 2010. Rankings on the right show a sample of Texas counties in 2020. There are 254 counties in Texas, so we couldn't capture them all here. In 2020, the Texas counties with the highest diversity index were Fort Bend County at 76.3%, Dallas County at 70.7%, and Bell County at 70.6%. 29 Texas counties out of 254 had diversity index scores higher than the national diversity index of 61.1%. Another diversity measure we developed are prevalence ranking graphs. These prevalence graphs show the percentages of the population that fall into the largest racial or ethnic group, the 2nd largest group, and the 3rd largest group. In this graph, the colors of the bars represent the different racial and ethnic groups shown in the legend on the left. Looking at the orange bars in column 1, we see the white alone, not Hispanic population was the most prevalent racial or ethnic group for all states, except for California, Hawaii, New Mexico, and the District of Columbia, a state equivalent, and Puerto Rico. Let's take a look at these states in more depth. In 2020, the Hispanic or Latino population, shown in green, became the largest racial or ethnic group in California, comprising 39.4% of its total population. Black or African American, not Hispanic, shown in blue, was the most prevalent group in the District of Columbia. Asian, not Hispanic, shown in red, was the most prevalent group in Hawaii. And the Hispanic or Latino population, shown in green, was also the most prevalent group in New Mexico and in Puerto Rico. As another diversity measure, we also present the diffusion score, which measures the percentage of the population that is not in the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd largest racial and ethnic groups combined. This metric, shown in the gray bar on the far right, tells us how diverse and unconcentrated the population is relative to the largest groups. The 2020 census results showed that Hawaii was the state with the highest diffusion score at 21.8%, followed by Alaska, Oklahoma, and Nevada. Texas's diffusion score was 9.2%. Texas already had a high index score in 2010, again 67.7%, in part because of the relatively large Hispanic or Latino population, 37.6% in 2010. Looking at these prevalence bars for Texas, we see that over the decade, the percentage of the population that was white alone, not Hispanic, decreased from 45.3% to 39.7%. We also see that the percentage of the Hispanic or Latino population increased from 37.6% to 39.3%. Additionally, the percentage of the population that was Black or African American, not Hispanic, increased very slightly from 11.5% to 11.8%. Looking more closely at the diffusion score, it increased from 5.6% in 2010 to 9.2% in 2020. Again, the diffusion score measures the percentage of the population that is not in the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd largest racial and ethnic groups combined. You can utilize our racial and ethnic diversity data visualization to calculate the prevalence graphs for counties across the state of Texas. This image or video from our data visualization shows the results for 2020. We've animated the image to a video to demonstrate all Texas counties, and we encourage you to explore the data visualization. Prevalence rankings illustrate the percentage of the population that falls into the first, second, or third largest racial or ethnic groups in 2020. The most prevalent racial or ethnic group in Texas was the white alone, not Hispanic population at 39.7%. So we see in the first column that many Texas counties had the white alone, not Hispanic population in the orange bars as the most prevalent racial or ethnic group, while others had the Hispanic or Latino population in the green bars as the most prevalent racial or ethnic group. In the second column, we see that the Hispanic or Latino population was the second largest racial or ethnic group in Texas, comprising 39.3% of the total population. So we see in the second column that many Texas counties had the Hispanic or Latino population in the green bars as the second most prevalent racial or ethnic group, while others had the white alone, not Hispanic population in the orange bars, or the Black or African American alone in the blue bars as the second most prevalent racial or ethnic group. Okay. Another measure that we use is a series of prevalence maps to show geographic distributions and patterns in racial and ethnic diversity across the country. The first map displayed here shows the most prevalent race or ethnicity group by county for 2020. In 2020, the white alone, not Hispanic population, shown in orange, was the most prevalent group about 90% of counties. The Black or African American alone, not Hispanic population, shown in blue, was the most prevalent group in some counties in the South. The Hispanic or Latino population, shown in green, was the most prevalent group in counties in the Southwest and West. In addition, the American Indian and Alaska Native alone, not Hispanic population, shown in purple, was the most prevalent racial or ethnic group in counties in Alaska, the Four Corners region, and the Upper Great Plains. There is more variation in the map for the second most prevalent racial or ethnic group, shown here on this slide. What we see now is that more racial or ethnic groups are represented, and the patterns are not as tightly clustered in specific regions. For example, the Hispanic or Latino population, shown in green, was the second most prevalent group and spanned the entire continental United States, with large numbers of counties in every region. The multiracial, not Hispanic population, shown in teal, was the second most prevalent group in many counties throughout the northern part of the country. Counties where the Black or African American alone, not Hispanic population, shown in blue, was the second most prevalent group, are mostly concentrated in the South and also in parts of the Northeast and the Midwest. You can use our diversity data visualization tool to zoom in and see the prevalence map distributions for Texas to see differences for counties across the state. This screenshot shows us the first most prevalent group for Texas counties in 2020. Again, we grabbed this image from the DataViz tool, and we were not able to capture the very top and very bottom of the state. So we encourage you to explore the data visualization so you can zoom in and out as needed. In orange, we can see counties where the white alone, not Hispanic population is the most prevalent group, concentrated in counties in the Panhandle to North and Central Texas and East Texas. And in green, we see counties where the Hispanic or Latino population is the most prevalent racial or ethnic group, concentrated in counties closer to the US-Mexico border from El Paso County to Cameron County. We also see pockets in the Panhandle and in Dallas County, Titus County, and Harris County. Selecting the second most prevalent group for 2020 shows us another dimension of diversity across Texas counties. You can also toggle back and forth between 2010 census data and 2020 census data using the interactive tool button seen with a red arrow. And there is a button to select the third most prevalent group. And we've been able to show you static images from the data visualization tool to introduce you to its capabilities, but you can interactively explore data for Texas and its counties using our interactive data visualization in the entire country. We encourage you to use our interactive data visualizations to explore its interactive maps and graphics, which illustrate the 2020 census results in comparison to 2010. You can access them from census.gov, and we'll be sure to put them in the, it looks like the links are being put into the chat, so that's great. And our Census Bureau colleagues also produced data gems, which are short videos to walk you through how to use the data visualizations. We also encourage you to read our America Count stories on the Census website. These stories describe in great detail the improvements we made for the 2020 census, which yield a more accurate portrait of how people self-identify in response to 2 separate questions on Hispanic origin and race. Our analyses of the 2020 census results show that the US population is much more multiracial and more racially and ethnically diverse than what we measured in the past. These concepts of racial and ethnic diversity help inform the public about the diversity and the complexity of the racial and ethnic composition of our country. And these measures complement the 2020 census redistricting data release, and the data enable us to explore the richness and complexity of our nation's population in a new light. Many thanks to all of you for being here with us today. Jessica and I look forward to your questions and to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Bev and Jessica, for this presentation. Much appreciated. So again, to the audience, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat or in the Q&A. We do have one question from Dan. Can reported 2020 race ethnicity data be converted into numbers that can be compared to 2010 without so much caution?
Well, due to the changes in the question format, it's the coding, the data processing, I don't think there's any, that's why we issued those notes. There were a lot of differences between 2010 and 2020. So we do have those comparisons on our website, but we do ask people to use caution when making these comparisons, especially when including the Hispanic or Latino population. Since we do see a lot, like Bev was showing with the diversity measure, we can, when it's separated Hispanic and then all the others by not Hispanic, you can get a closer comparison, more apples to apples if you do the same for for 2010 and 2020. So if you are making comparisons, that P2 table from the PL release is where you would make those comparisons.
Okay, thank you. And we do have another question from Helen. She's asking, why are the Asian population often grouped with the Pacific Island population?
So none of the tools on our site, none of the tools in the visualization group the Asian population with the Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander population. So you see all of the Asian data separate from Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander.
If you ever see that on other surveys, results from other surveys or what have you, it's likely due to sample size. The 1977 OMB standards, the category was Asian and Pacific Islander, but the 1997 standards, which we all adhere to from 1997, separates Asian from Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander. But if certain surveys have too small of sample sizes, sometimes you'll see the Asian and Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander category collapse. But like Jessica said, the decennial census and ACS, we separate those out per the standards.
Okay, and there's another question coming in from Matthew. Is the data on the visualization at 90% confidence? Do you happen to know the margin of error?
I do not know it off the top of my head, but we can get that answer for you if you send it to via Monica or anyone that wants to forward it our way. We can get that information for you.
Definitely, we will send this question your way, and then we will get back to you, Matthew. Okay. So, are there any other questions?
Yes, I see one from Lila Valencia. There's a move to consider equity and diversity more often when sharing data on race and ethnicity. Some suggest not listing white alone, not Hispanic or Latino always first. And if it's based on population size, shouldn't Hispanic be listed second or Asian listed third? All in an effort to move away from suggesting a, quote, default or, quote, reference race group? Is the Census Bureau having these conversations?
That's a really great question. The Census Bureau, along with several other agencies across the federal government, are working towards meeting requirements through a series of executive orders that have come out of this current administration about equity, including equity in data, advancing equity with data. When it comes to how the Census Bureau lists the races and ethnicities, for example, on the questionnaire design or when we publish the data on our data products, the rationalization we use is by population size, white, for the race question, white, Black, Asian, American Indian, Alaska Native, and then Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander, though the decennial census is a little bit more complicated than that. But we do have a rationalization. We are very much interested in testing how to reorder the categories. We've heard from many stakeholders to list by reverse population size, so the smallest population first, so Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander first, and then down to white being last. And then the reason we don't list white and then Hispanic as the second highest population is because of the two separate questions format. So Hispanic is listed separately because of the two separate questions format, with the Hispanic origin question being separate from the race question. But we hear that a lot from stakeholders, and we're very much interested in doing additional testing. What some of our testing from earlier in the last century, feels weird to say that, tested putting the race categories in alphabetical order. So that would mean American Indian or Alaska Native would be listed first. And that elicited some errors in responses because people saw that category listed first and then just circled the word American and then left everything else black because they stopped at American, circled it, and then left it blank. So so we've done some testing, but we want to continue building on that. Jessica, did you want to add anything to that answer?
No, I think you covered it really well.
Okay, thank you. And there's another question coming from Andrew. I know that there was some discussion during the Obama administration about adding a category capturing Arab, North African as a distinct racial ethnic group. Do you know the status of those discussions?
Sure. So last decade, there was a federal interagency working group that did look at potentially adding a Middle Eastern or North African category as a required minimum category in the standards. And much of that that discussion was based on research that Jessica in my area did, the 2015 National Content Test and the 2010 Alternative Questionnaire Experiment. However, changes were not made to the 1997 standards, and so therefore the 1997 standards remain the law of the land when it comes to how we collect race and ethnicity information. However, as we continue looking at results from the 2020 census, and as we continue preparing for future data products on detailed race and ethnicity categories, we're going to keep looking at the results and build upon our previous research from last decade. We're going to continue conversations with stakeholders, with the Office of Management and Budget, and with other federal statistical agencies to see what can be done to potentially change the standards. Ultimately, though, it is a decision by the Office of Management and Budget because they're the entity that delivers the directive that we all adhere to.
Okay, and another question from Matthew. How do you think the threat of the citizenship question affects the veracity of race reporting data?
So we use a lot of the population. We use 2020 population estimates as our benchmarks when comparing for data quality. And we know that there was a lot of confusion, but we worked really hard to address that confusion and during data collection for the 2020 census. And based on our benchmark comparisons, we're confident in the data that we collected, and we were pretty close to the benchmarks. So for Texas specifically, it is one of the states that did have, for example, the Hispanic count slightly smaller than the population estimates benchmark, but it is within I think it was around, yeah, it was around 0.5% off of the population benchmark. So the 2020 census count for Hispanic population was about 0.5% off of what the 2020 population estimates had as for the Hispanic population. So again, it was 10 states and DC that had the Hispanic data slightly lower than that population benchmark, but overall, we're really confident in the data, and you can access the PES out the data, and Bev and I can provide contact information for who to contact regarding the PES. What does PES stand for again?
Post-enumeration survey.
Post-enumeration survey. Yes. So the post-enumeration survey results, we can get the person in contact for that information.
Yeah, that would be great, and we will forward that to Matthew. Any other questions? I don't see any more in the Q&A. I don't know whether there are some in the chat. I haven't checked the chat. Doesn't look like that. Again, if you think of questions, I'm pretty sure if you send them in later today or tomorrow or even next week, Beth and Jessica are happy to answer these questions.
Well, thank you so much, Bev and Jessica. Bev, our Texanite, or our Texas, who's living somewhere else. Well, we thank you so much, both of you, for such an excellent presentation, and for sharing and highlighting the great tools that the U.S. Census Bureau has developed recently, and for also highlighting the dynamic changes happening in our state around race and ethnicity. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon and for sharing your expertise and all your hard work. We really, really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yes, thank you for having us. And I like your blue bonnets behind you. Very nice.
Thank you. All right, everyone. We know that we've had some questions posted throughout in the chat throughout the past hour or two, just to let everyone know that the session is being recorded, as well as all the PowerPoint presentations will be posted on our website within a week or two after the conference. So you'll have access to these presentations. We'll also send them out to those who registered, but perhaps were not able to attend. So just to let you know. Well, great. We are going to have another break right now. We're going to stick to our schedule. Our next presentation will take place at 3:30. So you can take a little break and hope you will join us back again. We will be featuring staff members from the Texas Demographic Center who will highlight some of our great data visualizations and tools. Many of our data users may not always have time to really kind of delve into all the great products that we have. And so we're going to highlight briefly, walk you through our website and all the tools that we have. So we hope that you'll return at 3:30 and learn more about all the tools that we have. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you here shortly at 3:30. All right, everyone, we'll get started now here for our last and final session of the day. So let me make sure everybody is on board here. All right, so welcome back everyone for our final session of today. Again, my name is Monica Cruz and I serve as the State Data Center lead. We've had great speakers so far. As you know, Dr. Potter opened up our presentation and our day with featuring demographic trends in our state. And then we had some of our friends from the U.S. Census Bureau, Bev Pratt and Jessica Peña, who spoke about race and ethnicity and the 2020 census, and you saw some great tools that they featured. Bev Pratt is from Texas. I think I called her a Texanite. I don't know if that's a real word. So that's what happens when you get a little nervous in the virtual world. So Texan, but we're so glad to have them. So now we're going to go ahead and transition to our last session, where we're going to feature some of our research and data products here at the Texas Demographic Center. I have the fortune of working with some brilliant sociologists and demographers here at the Texas Demographic Center. TDC, as we refer ourselves to, is housed at the Institute for Demographic and Socioeconomic Research here at the University of Texas in San Antonio. Some of you may not have been aware of that, but yes, Texas Demographic Center is housed within the Institute for Demographic and Socioeconomic Research here at UTSA. State data centers all across the country are housed at different organizations, sometimes at the state level, sometimes within universities. We are housed here at UTSA and have been housed here since we started with the State Data Network over 10 years ago now. But TDC, we do have offices not only here in San Antonio, but also in Austin. For today's presentation, several of my colleagues will feature data products that our team has put together over the past year. And this is our chance to shine, because our staff members work really hard to put some data products that are helpful for all of our Texas data users. So the first person that will be presenting today to share a little bit of our data products is my colleague, Rafael Gonzalez. So Rafael will be sharing one of our interactive tools and featuring the helpful data that can be obtained from that tool. So it's all yours, Rafael.
Thank you so much, Monica. And hello, everyone, again, and thank you for joining us. Like Monica said, my name is Rafael Gonzalez, and I'm a special research associate with the Texas Demographic Center and the Institute for Demographic and Socioeconomic Research, which also goes by ITSR for short. I lead a team that provides demographic data assistance to metropolitan planning organizations, also known as MPOs, across the entire state on behalf of the Texas Department of Transportation, or TxDOT. Now, one of the ways in which we can better inform our stakeholders is by providing accurate historical trend data. And we do this by building and then relying on interactive decennial census data tools. Now, you can think of these data tools as one-stop shops for Texas decennial census data. Now, many of you who have visited our website know that it is pretty feature-rich. So first, I'm going to show you how to access this tool. And I am going to share my screen with you at this time. Right. And Monica or Janine, can everybody see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Excellent, thank you. So when you navigate to our website's landing page, you're going to use the menu that is here near the top of the screen, and you're going to hover over Library and click on Interactive Tools. And this is going to bring you to our Interactive Tools page. And on this screen, you see the links to 3 tools. We're going to focus on the first one here on your left. Go ahead and click on this. And so on this screen, you see the redistricting data for Texas counties for the years 2000 through 2020 tool. The data source for this tool is right below the title, and this tool was built using Tableau. Now, by default, this tool is set to include all Texas counties, which you see here in the asterisk County, Texas, all. But you can change that by navigating all the way to the right has the map where we have two drop-down menus. Here you can select from all 254 Texas counties, or you can select Council of Governments. Since TDC is housed out of Bexar County, I'm going to go ahead and use the county drop-down menu and select Bexar County. Once the selection is made, the map directly next to it is going to display a dot which features your selection, and you can zoom in on it using your mouse wheel or the interactive controls that are included within the map. Now, once you go and make your selection, you go all the way to the left over here, and you have the table which summarizes your selection for the year 2020. So the total population is on the top row. This table then disaggregates the data by race, including those individuals that are Hispanic or Latino, and those individuals that are non-Hispanic or Latino, such as the non-Hispanic white population, non-Hispanic Black or African American alone, etc. And at the bottom of this table is the total population for everyone 18 years of age and over. Also note that there is a legend here in green that summarizes or provides for you the meaning for a lot of the acronyms that you will see on this table and throughout the rest of this tool. I also wanted to kind of point out to everyone, just on a quick note, up above here, we have the different pages. So right now we're looking at county profile, but there are two additional pages that are also featured in this tool that we will be going over here briefly. So below this summary table, we have a visualization that has the total population, well, it has the population totals, I'm sorry, for Bexar County for the year 2000 through 2020. And directly beneath it, you also have a display of the shares of the population by race and ethnicity, again, by those decennial census years. Now, to the right of this visualization, we have housing unit data, which is once again for this. This is for the decennial census 2020 year, and it includes the number of occupied housing units as well as the occupancy rate. Now, I did earlier mention we have heard group quarters mentioned earlier today, and you can see a summary of the group quarters population by major group quarter type. I want to bring your attention now all the way down to the bottom of the tool, and you will see I'll call it a menu. It's a guide that has several links, so you can go back and forth through the different pages that are featured in this tool. You can reset it. You can also share this information once you submit a query to the tool. You can share it to your social media feed of choice. But also, you can download this information using several different formats that we have here. I'll be covering this briefly once we get to the next table over. And for accessibility and presentations, there's also a full screen option for you to use as well. So let me go ahead and scroll up to the top. And I briefly want to highlight now the county table page here. Now, this one is where you get a little bit more interactive with this tool. So currently all 254 counties are selected. And what I think is really cool about this tool is that you can select one or more counties. For example, you want to compare Bexar County or Brazos County. And so what you would do is go all the way to the right, and we have, once again, a filter for both counties or council of governments. What you'll see here is that you can now make the selection for one or more counties. And so for here, we'll unselect all, and we want to look at Bexar, and we want to look at Brazos County. And so once you select these, you'll note that the table here begins to populate. And say, for example, that you're only interested in that population 18 years of age and over. So you'll unselect total. It'll give you automatically will populate the population 18 and over for these two counties. And say that you're only interested in the year 2020. So you would unselect all the years that you're not interested in, and you'll keep the one that you are, and it'll populate here. What is really useful, and I use this tool quite a bit when I'm working on the demographic control tools, as they're known for the metropolitan planning organizations, is that what I will do is then I'll either take the information off the screen, or I'll go down to the menu here, and I'll go ahead and click on crosstab, and it'll give me the option to export this cross-tabulation by either Excel or into a CSV file format. I click download, and I can go ahead and open it and manipulate it on a spreadsheet software of choice, or I can manipulated in other ways as well. So I think that this is a really cool, really useful part of this tool. But last and not least, I want to talk about the county ranks. And so here we have the county ranks by numeric change for 2010 through 2020, and Texas counties, again, ranked by percent change. And so we have both numeric and percent change here. Let me go ahead and stop sharing the screen. And so that's just a very brief overview of the functionality of this tool. I recommend that anybody that's interested to kind of go ahead and play around with this tool, the different pages included in the tool, but also all the other tools that my colleagues are going to be presenting on. I think that a lot of this is really useful, especially when you're wanting to find data for Texas on kind of a whim. You want to be able to find something quickly and interactively. I think a lot of the stuff that will be presented is going to be really, really impressive, really amazing. And my hat goes off to everybody on the team who has spent a lot of time working on these. And with that, Monica, I'll turn it over back to you.
Thank you so much, Rafael, for featuring that product. We're really proud of that product. We think it's a great tool. We did get requests from our affiliate network to try and provide that data by councils of government, COGs, which we did include that. So we hope that our COG friends or anyone wanting to look at that data will be able to, will utilize that. So my next colleague who will be presenting is Jeff Jordan, and Jeff will be sharing a little bit about some of our mapping data tools. Go ahead, Jeff.
Let me share my screen. My name is Jeff Jordan. I'm a senior research associate with IDSR and TDC. And I'm going to be talking about a couple tools briefly that sponsor into the TxDOT contract that Rafael mentioned. The first is this one-stop demographic data analysis tool. And it was designed initially to give users a quick and easy way to access and report general demographic information. It compiles data from different sources, giving users access to current information in one place, and it serves as a starting point for reporting general trend analysis. The reports can be generated for one or more counties, tracts, places, districts, or urbanized areas. And you start at the home screen, and we'll get to these data dashboards in a minute. You can click on county for area reports and select multiple counties. You know, a single county or multiple counties to create a region. Click continue. You go to another page where you can select a report you want to generate. And then once you generate the reports, messed up. But anyway, so it takes a little while to populate the reports. But you can select either the 2019 ACS or the 2020 data in some cases, and you can generate the reports, and then it will populate and it'll have tabular data as well as graphs, and if it's from the ACS data, it also present a margin of error graph. As you can see, you can look at the tabular data. And here's the data points with margin of errors around the points, so you can see how much error there may be involved in that. So you can also click on the data dashboards to get to the mapping and the infographics. And so these were created using ArcGIS Online Web App Builder using dashboard themes embedded in a story map. And the infographic widgets configured in panels to present either aggregate or individual geographic level data in chart or graph format for easy exploration and visualization of trends. And here's the one for county. And again, this uses the 5-year 2019 ACS survey data, the TDC projections, TxDOT data, and Department of Motor Vehicles data. And if you want to look at the census tract, you can click on the census tract button up there to go there, and it will have it down to the census tract level if you want to navigate to a little bit more detail. But right now, we're just going to cover the county data. So initially, it starts out just with like Raphael's tool. He mentioned the whole state, but you can select either a single county or multiple counties. And when you do that, all the widgets surrounding will update. So, you know, this is hard to read. You can click on the expansion and take a look at it and see how it's easier to read there, and then go back. So also the selection, you can select by point, rectangle, polygon, circle, line. If you want to select by a line, for example, if you wanted to go in and say I wanted to select all the counties that are around the I-35 corridor from San Antonio to Austin, I can select that and it will show me highlight those counties and give the population for those and all the different demographic data. So you can have a minority pop, race, ethnicity this way, and also race, ethnicity by this format, by individual counties. Again, since you may not be able to read the legend, you can click on the expansion and show. And when you hover over the different bars, it will tell you the different race, ethnic categories with the associated numbers. And on some of these, if there are too many widgets in one box, there may be a little down arrow on the bottom that you can select to choose the other items. So you have poverty, group quarters, and we have commuting. We have different dashboards on this one kind of overall dashboard application. So you have household characteristics, employment and education, general trends, and a lot of these. This was developed for TxDOT, so we have a lot of transportation specific information, as well as we have our population projections. And this will all be updated when the new population estimates and projections are created, are released. And for example, on this one here, if you chose, say, Bexar, Harris, and Dallas County, it would show the different, you can do some comparisons between those. And again, you can expand that out to look at it. And finally, before I run out of time here, when you select these, you can click on the bottom tab there, go to options, so show selected records. It will show all the counties you selected, and then you can download you can export the selected records to CSV to do further comparisons on your own. And I think that's about how much time I have. And I will turn it back over to Monica so she can turn it over to Solani to show some more interesting information.
Thank you so much, Jeff. That TxDOT tool, One Stop, is a remarkable tool. And I know I started and joined with the team a little over a year ago, and I wasn't aware of our tool. So every day, and since when I first came on board and learned about it, it's a great tool for a lot of our planners, a lot of people at the local level that want to kind of grab multiple counties at once to look at all the socioeconomic data. So we put the link to that One Stop in the chat. So hopefully you can access that and save it on your computer and utilize it at your convenience. So my next colleague who will be sharing a little also about one of our data tools is Solani Rajput. I think Solani is our mastermind of swipe
sorry,
maps.
it's kind of dark here.
She's our mastermind of our
I think I
swipe
forgot to
maps.
close the windows.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
So Solani, thanks so much for joining us. Solani is going to share a little bit about one of our interactive maps. She worked so hard to create a great tool of interactive maps. So go ahead, Solani, the floor is yours.
Hi, I'm Saloni Rajput. I'm a research data analyst at TDC and ITSR. I work at the Texas Demographer's office in Austin. And one of the duties I have is working on web-based GIS applications for the TDC website. So I will be sharing with you where to find those applications and share one of them with you. Let me share my screen. Okay, yeah, you can find these interactive mapping applications on our website when you go to geography under that interactive maps. And these are the recent application that we have published. This one was after the redistricting data was released, we created this application for comparing population and race by all the geographies, right from county, tract, block group to block level. So I encourage you to go and take a look at this, but I will be sharing this application with you all today, Employment and Education in Texas, comparing 2010 and 2020. So this application was built using ArcGIS Online Story Map and the swipe application. The application, this application, the data source for this is 2006 to 2010 and 2020 American Survey 5-year ACS data. So let me just move this and then I can show you. The map on the left side of the swipe bar is 2010. And when you swipe from left to right, I mean right to left, and you'll see 2010, 2020. So in this, we are showing employment and education along with comparing them for 2 time periods. So now for employment, we have civilian labor force and unemployment. Civilian labor force, you have the definitions here for civilian labor force unemployment. And there's the red polygons that you see are the service, junior college service areas. These are just for reference, just to show where the, which counties and the area included within each of these service areas. In this, under this tab, we are mapping percent civilian labor force. The lighter counties are counties that have less than 35%, and as we go higher, the counties get darker, and you see that for Loving County, the civilian labor force is was the 92.3%, and in 2020 it came down to 78%. So you can take a visualize at the state level, and you'll see that. Oops. You can see the changes by county. Next tab, we have unemployment. Same, we're showing percentages, and they go from 2% to 12%. The ones that are lighter have 2% or less than 2% of unemployment. And as you swipe, you see, I think we're getting better because the map is lighter, so the employment situation has improved, I guess. For education, we have 4 different tabs: high school or equivalent. The lighter counties are less than 25% of the population that has high school or equivalent education. So this is for 2020. This is 2010 when you compare it to 2020. The next tab shows some college education. So I should be actually. So this is 2010. This is 2020. The next tab shows associate degree or associate degree for by county, of course. And these go from 4% to 8%, greater than 8%. And this is for the population 25-year and older. For education attainment, we're using highest level of education completed in terms of highest degree for people 25 or older. And the last tab shows bachelor's degree or higher by 2010 and 2020. So if you're interested looking at any particular county or more detail, you can either type in the county here, or if you know the county, you can go directly to the county and click. So if I'm looking at Travis County, so this is the civilian labor force for 2020. Oh, cheat. We clear the selection. Okay, so this is showing 2010, which was 72.6%. And 2020 didn't change much, I guess, for Travis County. And you can further zoom in and get the same information for track level. So these are 2010 tracks. 2020, you click on them, you have the same information that will come up, that will show you the percent for each tab, whichever tab you're looking at, it will show you the percent of the, for that count, for the tract. And then it also compares it with the Texas rate for each of the different variables that we are mapping here. Yes, so after we released this map, we did get a lot of interest. I think some people from Southwest Texas Junior College area requested us for maps and data for all the counties that are within that college service area. I think that's what time I have. Okay, thank you very much. And I encourage you to go and look at this interactive applications that we have on our website. Back to you, Monica.
Thank you so much, Salani. I really appreciate. So yes, like I had mentioned earlier, Salani is our whiz at all swipe maps and highlighting all that data. And as she demonstrated, you know, when you're using those swipe maps, data to the right is 2020, and if you swipe over, you go to the next decade. So anyways, it's a really helpful tool to kind of really see how changes are occurring from one decade to the next. We have several of those you know, data tools, mapping tools on our website, in our interactive tools under geography. So we hope that you'll make sure to use those. Another thing that we here at the Texas Demographic Center is we're often updating and creating infographics with a lot of the census data, and that's also on our website. And I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Salaha Udin, who will feature one of our most recent infographics. It's all yours, Salaha.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Monica, for giving me the chance to introduce myself and talk about one of the research data products of TDC. As Monica said, I am Mohammad Salahuddin and goes by Salaha, working as a research scientist associate for TDC and ETSER. Primarily, I work for the TextDot project to prepare the different data products and for MPO's travel demand modeling purposes. And also I worked as a support staff in researching the different demographic research products for TDC. So as Monica said, that TDC regularly produced and published some infographics focusing on the event-based or Census Bureau's data released. So especially we produce those data to disseminate the interesting facts on Texas. So now I would like to share a recently published data. So here we go. I'm going to share my screen. So very recently, we have published the data infographics, and it focuses on who is moving to Texas. This data is mainly produced from the ACS 5-year PALMS data, also known as public use microdata, so microdata sample. And these infographics especially showing the net migrants or domestic migrants who are coming to the Texas from other states in the USA. And if you look at that infographics, you can see that the domestic migrants are more likely to be between the ages of 25 to 44. They are more ethnically diverse, rent their homes, have children, and more likely to have been born in another country than current Texas residents. Also, they are more likely to have bachelor degree or higher degree, earn more than the median income of current Texans, and have occupations in business, computer engineering, and healthcare. And if you'd like to know more about this kind of infographics, you can browse the TDC website. So once you go to the TDC website and go to the library infographics, then you will get that kind of several kind of infographics focusing to the national event or state-based event, as well as census data release like that. I have already presented one, this one. Then this one was another one, which was published after the ACS data released, 5 years ACS census data release. And this one was on the employment education Texas. So there are several infographics. You are free to browse and cite those, and they are very interesting and easy to find out the information from here. So that's all from myself. Thank you, Monica. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Salaha. Really appreciate you featuring our infographics. We try and put those out at least once a month or whenever new data comes out. Like I said, we strive to create those data products to feature and highlight demographic changes happening in our state. So our next presenter is my colleague Po-Chen Huang, and Po-Chen will feature and share some of the other data analysis and work that we do. So take it away, Po-Chen.
Thank you, Monica. Now I'm going to share my screen. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes, we can see it, and make sure you introduce yourself and your role here.
Sure. Thank you for having me, Monica. My name is Po-Chen Huang. I'm a special research associate at ITSER TDC at UTSA. I joined the TDC ITSER team in 2019, so I have been very fortunate to have the opportunity to work on several projects. So I always say I deem myself as an applied demographer, and I work on a little bit of everything here in the project. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about, in addition to the data products and reports, infographics we generated as TDC, I also want to showcase or demonstrate a kind of collaborative work we did on behalf of the Census Bureau, which is delineating the public use microdata areas for the 2020 census. So Salaha just kind of briefly mentioned the data for the infographics, which is the PALMS data. So I'm going to talk about what's behind the scene of that PALMS data. So I will be quickly kind of walk you through two things. So the first thing is, what are the PUMAs? And the second thing is how we delineated those PUMA boundaries. So first part, PUMA 101. So the PUMAs I'm going to talk about are not on the left-hand side. It's not the PUMAs that I want to talk about. So basically, pumas are non-overlapping statistical geography areas with no fewer than 100,000 people. So it's a statistical geographic area with that population threshold. And it's kind of delineated of every 10 years when the census data released. Who is delineating that? State data center, and in collaboration with stakeholders from local entities. And why we need this? Because pumas are the geography embedded in the POMS file. So when do we use POMS file? So as many of you may know, Census Bureau, they pre-tabulated a lot of useful tables, but if sometimes you want to drill down to a specific question, you need to use your own customized table. That's when you need to use the POMS data. So the ACS POMS file provides more than 500 variables or attributes. So you can imagine people can utilize cross-referencing all the variables in a very small geography, then you can re-identify individuals of important confidential data or confidential information. In order to prevent that confidentiality risk, if the Census Bureau decide they should restrict the information, the POMS file, to a specific geography that carries at least 100,000 people. And that geography is Puma. So that is Puma. Okay, so here is a kind of a quick overview about, I'm sorry, I missed something. So the existing geography that Census Bureau already have that is closest to that population threshold, 100,000, will be county. However, not every county is having more than 100,000 people. So Census Bureau decided to create a specific geography called Puma. So there are three types of Puma. On the left-hand side, you can see it's a relatively large county in terms of population size. It's Tarrant County. It has 16 Pumas inside one county. And in the middle, you can see it's a single county Puma. So that Puma only includes Kaufman County. And on the right-hand side, you can see it's in the Panhandle area. Those counties surrounding Potter County and Randall County, those are counties with relatively small population size. So we kind of combine them together and join them in a single Puma. So that's just a kind of the Pumas in a snapshot. So what is the process we did to delineate the 2020 census, to delineate the 2020 Puma? So there are 6 criteria that Census Bureau shared with us. So the first 2 kind of outline the population threshold. So it has the minimum population threshold of 100,000. It has to be satisfied. And the second criteria is a soft threshold. So we can split Puma, a large Puma, into 2 Pumas if it exceeds 200,000, but it's not necessary. And I will just I won't go through all the detail in the criteria. So we basically follow the criteria as a reminder, as a rule. So what's the process? So basically we perform this delineation on QGIS, and it has an add-on app called GUPS, the Geographic Update Partnership software provided by Census, along with a bunch of tools we use to perform the delineation for 2020. So the first step, we kind of insert the 2010 Puma boundary as the starting point to see whether we need to make modification to 2010 boundary, make it the new 2020 boundary. So GUPS provide population at the census tract level. So census tract is the smallest unit in this whole process, delineation process. So once we inserted that, in this map, you can see there are some blank Puma or blank tracts. Those are census tracts with boundary change in 2020. So this GUPS application cannot assign this tract to a specific Puma in the 2010 temporary boundary. So we need to address those before we move on to modify or move on to step 2. So we do that, and like here, I just want to quickly show you highlighted in Pumas highlighted in light orange. Those are Puma drop below the population threshold, so we need to expand that in terms of population. And Puma highlighted in red is over the 200,000, so we can consider splitting that. So I'll talk about that just in a second. So this is an example about a census tract boundary change. In 2010, it was 2 tracts. In 2020, it became 1 census tract. So we assign this census tract to the bottom Puma. So we do that for 16 other similar cases. So the step 2, like I mentioned, once we send all the tracts to 2010 temporary Pumas, we have to address those Pumas highlighted in 2 colors, the orange or the red. So in order to kind of inform our decision making, we use some tools. The first one is a population change analysis tool. So we use the 2010, 2019 population, and then we kind of trended that change for each Puma. So we aggregated the population count from tract and then trended to 2030 because every Puma needs to be used for the next decade. So we want to know whether this delineation will be able to sustain for the next decade. So basically, the tool highlighted in red means those are Pumas we need to pay attention. Maybe in the future, those Pumas might drop below 100,000. So that's one tool. The other tool is the census block level population change. So in the middle, we have the population change in growth rate. So darker green meaning higher population growth. In darker red meaning population decline, higher level of population decline. And another layer is the actual population change in terms of count. So in this example, we highlighted kind of, we look at, we want to split the Puma in the outside here into 2 because it's over that population threshold, and we want to know where we can split them. So we look at the green growing area so that can sustain the next decade. So we draw the boundaries here. Okay, so that's just a tool. So here I'm going to quickly show you some of the delineation we decided. So here, Lubbock Puma, the outside of Lubbock City is growing over that. So we kind of add more census tract to the center city, meaning the city is growing so that the 2 Pumas now are satisfy the population threshold. And this example is on the left-hand side, Grayson County is over that population threshold. However, Puma need to be contiguous. It's under one of the criteria. So we cannot split Grayson and then combine Cook and Fenton. So we just leave it as it is in 2010. So that's what I meant by the soft boundary of 200,000. And on the right-hand side, Hunt County is just 44 people shy away from that 100,000 threshold. So we simply cannot make the case and split them. So we just keep it as it is. Okay, and then for Pumas with drop below that population threshold, we just simply expanded that by adding 1 more tract to this Puma. And this is a more complex case in the kind of lower Rio Grande area. This Puma is losing population, so we added live oak. We took live oak from the other Puma, added to this one, and then this Puma got removed of live oak, dropped below that population threshold, so we add the cell, stem it to the middle Puma, and then finally we look at the third one, the outside one, this one. Once remove these 2 counties, they are still within the state boundary, so that's it. So it's a kind of a 3-step of the kind of the modification. So this is a more complex one. So just to give you a summary, we changed 16 census tract, we assigned 16 census tract with boundary change to the 2010 temporary Puma and addressed those highlighted Pumas, either expanded that or split them. So 5 Pumas are expanded and 7 out of the 9 Pumas with more than 200,000, we split them. And the 2 Pumas that we cannot split are the Grayson County and Rockwell and Hunt County. And ended up, we have 218 Pumas for 2020. And we submitted the finalized delineation file to Census Bureau on January 31st, 2022. So that's it, the Puma delineation in a nutshell. So thank you. And I'm going to stop sharing and Back to
Thank
you,
you,
Monica.
Ho-Chen. We have a question just related to this since we just finished discussing. We have a question from Lila
Okay.
asking, can you describe the engagement process for getting input from around the state for the Puma delineation?
That's a really good question. So as you can see, we sent out a finalized data file toward the end of January. So we did send out an email with what you saw here, with our proposed delineation to our affiliate, and Monica was the one who helped us to draft the email. So we sent it out to county, to COGS, to all the affiliates, our data users, to kind of specifically ask them to review our proposed change. And we included a very detailed, several very detailed documentation saying, kind of outline what I just mentioned, how we decide what to do, what to change. So we asked for feedback. So that's pretty much the process, the feedback process we were doing. And early on, even before we start delineating the Census 2020 Puma, we sent out an invitation to the same group of people because Census Bureau was providing training in terms of how to do the delineation. So we invite them to join us for the training, and we can talk about their thought and something like that. And if I remember it correctly, there are 3 to 4 other data users or our affiliate join us at those trainings. And yeah, that's about it. Hope that answered your question, Lila.
Yes, so as Po-Chan mentioned, we sent it specifically to those who are members of our affiliate network. Also, we sent it to all metropolitan planning organizations, counties, and COGS to provide input and feedback on that. So thank you for that question. So our next presenter is going to be my colleague, Janine Geppert. Janine, go ahead.
Yeah.
It's all yours.
Hello, everyone again. Good afternoon. My name is Janine Geppert. I've been with the Texas Demographic Center as a research scientist associate for almost 6 years. And my main responsibilities at the TDC are processing customer data requests and organizing and conducting the data collection for our population estimates and projections program. And as part of our population estimates and projections team, I'm working closely together with our population and estimates projections lead, Dr. Yu, and our new research data analyst, Dr. Kim, who joined our team last week. So, and I know we're running a little late, but we cannot conclude the session without speaking about our bread and butter product, our population estimates and projections, which will, as Dr. Potter mentioned, and I also put in the Q&A, we are going to release our new set of population projections this fall, as well as our 2021 population estimates. So you will find those 2 products here on our website, and in order so that you can go and see the data or access the data, I will quickly show you where you can find it. So this is the main starting page, our home page. You go to data, click on population estimates. I'm going to start with the estimates, and you will scroll down and you see then the 2021 data located here, and then you can just select the data type you are looking for, either total population by county or place, or MSA, or even Council of Governments, or the age, sex, and race, ethnicity for state and counties. And then you have the possibility to either download as a CSV or a PDF. If you want to customize your data, you can also use our population estimates and download tool. And I hope you can also see the screen. So here you can select certain criteria, and we want not data for counties, but we will say we want a certain council of government. We want the total, but total sex, but we want a certain age group. Then you can say custom age groups. And here you can enter the age group you are looking for. We say we want to look at the age group for the 65 and older. And we also want then the race and ethnicity breakdown. And here, then you can select the county of government you are interested in, and you will submit your request, and you see on the bottom of the page, you will get your results. And these results you can export as a CSV or Excel spreadsheet. So for our population projections, it's the same way how you can access the data. You will go to data, population projections, and then you land on this page. So it might look a little overwhelming at the beginning, but here on the top you can see our current projections, and this is more or less a shortcut. So if you're interested in our special projections, for example, our labor force projections, you will click on here and you will get to the bottom of the page where the labor force projections are located. And then you see those extra tiles here where you can find the methodology and publications we had with regards to our labor force projection. And then you can see that you can download the state projection and state and county projections of the total labor force and the labor force by race and sex for 2010 to 2050. So when we go up, you see we have the household projections. It will, when you click on it, jump to the household projections. And then we have those other two products, which is sex and race ethnicity. And here we also have the age, sex, and race ethnicity. So when we click on here, you will see it's the same structure. We have here the portion where we have our age groups, then for the state and for the state and county. And we have here our single years of age for the state and the state county. If you don't want the whole file, you can just select an individual county, and then you can download the Excel file accordingly. A little hidden under here is our grade projections tool, which I quickly want to point out as well. You will get, or you will land on this page where you also have the option to select your criteria. And here we say, no, we don't want to include state level. We want to just look at certain county or maybe COG data. So you might wonder why we have those three areas here. And this is that you have the possibility to request three tables. So you might want to go in here and say, okay, I'm interested in a certain council of government. Let's say Alamo Area Council of Government. So, but I also want to see certain counties within the government. So maybe, so we have Peña County and Comal County come to mind right now. And then you can, again, specify your criteria, and you want to say, okay, I want 2030, 2040, 2050, the data for those years. Age group, I'm also interested in the 65 plus. Age, we will leave, sex, we will leave total, and race and ethnicity breakdown. You will select everything. So you see we have the Alamo Area Council of Government, the counties selected, and then you will click on Submit. And again, you will get your results for Table 1. This was the County of Government with the Alamo area data. And then when you scroll further down, you have the table where you look at specific counties for this located within the Council of Government. And here you also have the possibility to export these data. So this concludes my my presentation of those data tools. You might want to check back those sites when we have published our projections, as we soon get a new communication specialist, and we might want to restructure our site a little bit. However, we definitely will keep our data tool and those files, state and county level files you can select here. So what else, Monica?
Thank you, Janine. There was one question that was posted in the chat about whether projections can be downloaded by track level.
No, so the lowest level we offer our population projections are county level. So we offer state level projections and county level projections. There are often requests about place level projections. We do not offer those either, but we are open to help places who want to produce their own population projections. But no, to answer your question, no, we don't provide projections on census tracts.
You might want to mention the team that works on projections in addition to you.
Say again?
Mention the names of our team members who also work on projections, yes?
Yeah, I think I did it in the beginning, but I can do it again.
Sorry.
So we have our projections, or our estimates and projections team lead, which is Dr. Yu. She is the lead for our population projections and estimates for the last 6 years, if I'm not mistaken. And as I said, we have our new research data analyst, Dr. Kim, just joined us last week. He will also work closely on the estimates and projections. And again, we will publish both products this fall, and we are really excited about that.
Thank you so much, Janine. Thank you. Our projections and estimates, population estimates and projections team works really hard, and we're really, we have a great team providing this. Like she mentioned, we'll be updating our projections later this year. I'm going to conclude today with just one thing that I want to mention, and I'm going to share my screen. So hopefully y'all can see my screen. Yes. This is, okay. Can y'all see my count question resolution screen?
Yes, but there are gray areas. Now we can see it clearly.
Okay, yeah. Great. Well, we just wanted to at least mention this is not an actual data product that we work on, but we provide a lot of outreach to inform our governmental units about the Census Bureau's Count Question Resolution Program. We did a little fact sheet on our website. You can learn more about it, but we didn't want to go without at least mentioning this very important program that the Census Bureau sponsors. For those of you who are not familiar with what we call CQR, or the Census Bureau calls CQR, but the 2020 Census Count Question Resolution Program gives tribal, state, and local governments an opportunity to request a review of their official 2020 census counts. The operation allows governmental units to identify potential errors in legal boundaries and/or housing counts in their area that may have occurred while processing the 2020 census. CQR requests can only be submitted by the highest elected or appointed officials. So that means county judges or mayors. So that's important to know. The deadline to submit these reviews for CQR is June 30th of 2023. So you have a little bit more than over a year to submit these requests. Texas Demographic Center, we do not process the CQR. Only the U.S. Census Bureau does, and they will, and so you can look that up on their website. The other thing I wanted to mention was that, as noted here on my PowerPoint, you can call or email them if you have particular questions about the CQR process. Another big question that individuals have regarding CQR is that they say, one question is, can the CQR operation change the official 2020 census data? The answer to that is no. Any CQR corrections made will not impact the apportionment counts, redistricting data, or any other 2020 census data products. However, the revised counts are integrated into all subsequent population estimates released after the 2020 Census CQR case is closed. For example, the American Community Survey that is offered every year uses population totals from the Population Estimates Program at the incorporated place, minor civil division, and county levels to adjust the population totals published by the survey. So again, a CQR, if there are any changes, it does not change the 2020 census data. It just changes any surveys put out by the American Community Survey or the Census Bureau after 2020 leading up to 2030. So that's really important. The other thing I did want to mention that for the first time this year, the U.S. Census Bureau will also launch what is considered to be a group quarter CQR process. For those of you who are not familiar with group quarter, that terminology, group quarters consist of nursing homes, dormitories, correctional facilities, and so as a result of some of the challenges during the 2020 census, the Census Bureau will be launching a group quarter CQR process, and as soon as we get more details about that, we will be sharing that with everyone in our network. So, all right, I will close this off here and stop sharing. All right, everyone. Well, this pretty much concludes our conference for today. I really want to thank everybody for joining us. We hope that you found the information and the content helpful and useful. Please join us again tomorrow at 1 p.m. when we'll feature speakers from the U.S. Census Bureau who will provide an update on 2020 census products, results from the 2020 Census Post-Enumeration Survey. We'll also have a speaker who will highlight forecasting population methods using urban economics, and a speaker from the Texas Census Institute. One last reminder, today is election day across the state for the primary runoffs. So if you haven't voted yet, you have until 7 p.m. This evening. Visit the Texas Secretary of State's website or your local county elections website to find out where to vote, where to cast your vote. So this concludes our conference for today. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow at 1 p.m. Have a good evening.